Hi everyone, I'm John Lynn, the founder and chief editor at Healthcare IT Today. We're excited to bring you another episode in our CIO podcast series. We know your job is challenging and we want to help you be more successful. And we're here at the CES conference in Las Vegas. And our guest today is Jason Swoboda. He's the Director of Innovation at Tampa General Hospital. Welcome, Jason.
Hey, thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, so we're talking innovation at CES, which is really interesting.
It's amazing.
What's something interesting you've seen here at CES?
Well, I just walked past the LEG display, and it takes up like 2 semi-truck loads of LEG display. I've never seen anything like that. Really exciting.
Yeah, it's amazing to think about that. Imagine that in the hospital war room with remote patient monitoring for each room. Is that the application?
Oh my gosh, it has many applications, that's for sure. Ironically, we are working on digital whiteboards in all of our patient rooms. So
okay.
my mind's kind of thinking there just a little bit, but we also have a command center, and that would be an excellent use for a command center.
It's a preview of what the command center should look like or could look like. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about remote patient monitoring. You've been working on a lot of projects there. How have you approached remote patient monitoring?
Yeah, at Tampa General, we've really looked at kind of easing into the remote patient monitoring realm. We know we have about 3,600 patients that could benefit from some sort of remote patient monitoring. I came previously, before I was with Tampa General, I was at Mercy Virtual. So we had, learned a lot of lessons learned that we had with that, and that I brought those lessons back to TGH when working on that. The way that we've decided to work on remote patient monitoring was to work on certain conditions first. So hypertension, COPD, CHF.
Mm-hmm. The expensive ones.
The expensive ones. But they're really kind of the traditional in the form of performing remote patient monitoring. Mm-hmm. And so that's how we've started. We have a roadmap where we'd like to go, given that we're considering this a pretty good pilot. But once that pilot's successful, I believe it is pretty successful. But once we have a successful pilot, the roadmap is to go into other disease states or chronic condition states.
Interesting. Let's talk about that more, because I think that's the challenge everyone's facing is, one, what disease state should we start with? Because you can't do everything. You can't boil the ocean,
That's
right?
That's
so
right.
What do we start with? And then what's the bigger vision? You want to go to more disease states? And are we implementing 100 best of breed, or how are you going to approach it?
I think that's one of the challenges with remote patient monitoring is that there's a lot of point solutions that are out there, and that makes it difficult for an IT professional today. Mm-hmm. And so I think that is a challenge that we have. But the roadmap would be starting off with those disease states and then moving up to some of the more niche. Tampa General, of course, treats a lot of patients that have had transplant or have some kind of advanced organ failure. And so that's kind of a natural progression, or oncology might be a natural progression. But what we've seen in the organization, in the industry, is that there are a lot of point solutions that are specified around, or the peripherals are specified around, or the if you will, the GUIs are around just those specific states. And so, right now, trying to integrate all those different point solutions presents kind of a challenge.
Well, it seems like that's part of the big challenge, is that you don't want to integrate 100 point solutions into Epic. That becomes just a nightmare for everyone.
No, you're absolutely right. One of the things that we're trying to architect is that kind of what I consider that enterprise bus, right? So we have some kind of a foundational layer where the physiological measures can go into, normalize across, and then have different outputs. One being the electronic medical record, another being a specific maybe GUI for a team that's specific to either oncology or on kidney or whatever that might be, or bariatrics. So I think that's hopefully the way of the future there. Yeah.
Has it been a challenge getting patients and doctors on board, or have they been excited for this type of monitoring and proactive care, if you will?
Yeah, so when we started remote patient monitoring, we know that there are 2 major stakeholders at place, right? Just like with any project,
sure.
Right? Change management is probably 80% of the issue with a failed project.
Yeah.
Without that, you're not going to be successful.
Right.
I think we all know that. But at Tampa General, that's exactly what we started with first. We had to make sure that we had the buy-in from our physicians, our PCPs, And then, of course, our PCP have a very strong engagement with our patients. And so, and I don't remember who said it, but somebody said, hey, if the patients trust the clinician, they're going to trust the technology.
Yeah.
And
that's a
so,
good point.
so that's really where we started. We started off getting the buy-in from the physicians, and that's why we started with the CHF, the COPD, the PCP population, health population first, and then get some experience behind that, and get some great wins, which we're already seeing some great wins, by the way,
Good.
and then move on from there. Yeah.
So what do you think are the biggest challenges, not challenges to implementing it, right? We talked about that and the integration, all that. What does RPM need to do to be more ready and more easily implemented?
Yeah. Well, I think you and I both know a company called Stel, right? So when we started looking at solutions for remote patient monitoring, we looked at a lot of different solutions. We also know that for our patient population, we have about 1,000 patients up on Stel right now. Their average age is about 74 years old. So that they're not
Makes sense.
They're not tech savvy. So it just needs to be, I'm going to say, press the easy button. And so really even though the technology on the infrastructure might be, pretty entailed, as long as to the end user, to the patients that are actually using it, keeping it simple, I think that's extremely, I think that's key.
Yeah.
And then, of course, making sure that everything is HIPAA compliant from kind of soup to nuts. Nobody wants to end up on the newspaper these days, right? So finding the correct vendor that not only presses the easy button, making it easy for the patients, but also knowing that data is secure. Our patients are asking for that. That's a requirement. So I think that's another huge challenge with, trying to make something easy, but yet maintaining HIPAA compliant. That's a challenge.
Yeah, it's always a challenge. Security and convenience, they're often at odds.
They always are.
Do those
Yeah, it's funny how that works like that.
For sure. So tell us more about your experience with Stel Life. Like, what have they done? How are you approaching it? What's the solution look like?
Yeah, so Stel has been an excellent vendor with us. We call them partners at Tampa General. Just a great partner. I'll tell you what, we have had the fastest adoption that they've ever had. So we went from 0 patients to almost nearly 1,000 patients up on remote patient monitoring in less than 4 months.
Wow.
Amazing. We've also we look at engagement on a remote patient monitoring type of a standpoint. We have had every single patient, nearly 1,000 patients, they at least report one physiological measure a month. But 83% of them report a measurement almost every other day.
Wow.
So you take a patient that is sick, right? They have some kind of a chronic condition.
Right.
They're probably not used to putting on a blood pressure cuff or stepping on a scale. They go from that to putting in a measurement every other day. That's crazy, engagement. And I think Stel has a lot to do with that. It just presses the easy button on it. The other thing is, we strive for health, like tequity.
Okay.
So, one of the things is some patients might not have internet at home, or they live in a rural area and they live in maybe a cell dead zone for AT&T, but not Verizon or, whatever. Well, with the Stel Hub, it's a quad band. So you don't have to ask the patient, hey, is this cell carrier dead in this area or that? We just send it home. We haven't had any issues. So really talking about pressing the easy button, not only from the patient experience, but from the IT perspective, it's been great.
Yeah. Well, I think everyone realizes that RPM is the future, and trying to understand how to do it is the challenge, right?
That's right.
And there's so much innovation that's happening, keeping up with it is a challenge as well. Interesting. Well, let's wrap this up. We always like to wrap up our CIO podcast talking about some career advice, some experience that you've had. What was maybe the best piece of advice or the most interesting piece of advice that you've been given in your career?
Yeah, that's a tough question. Thanks for asking me.
There's
Put me
a
on
lot
the
of
spot
them.
on that one. That's right. I think keeping your options open, right? So I went to school for being a physical therapist, right? And so when talking to some physical therapy mentors, they said, hey, keep your options. Healthcare is changing. Keep your options open. And so I wound up going from being a physical therapist all the way to a director of innovation. So I think just keeping those options open, and don't be afraid when somebody presents an opportunity to you, and it might not seem 100% where you are headed in that general area, it opens a lot of more doors. So I would say keep your options keep your options open.
Interesting. I think you're the first PT we've had on the CIO podcast, so that makes sense.
That's great. I'll work on your shoulder after this.
It's this shoulder.
Is it
I
that
play
one?
a lot
Yeah.
of
Or
ultimate
my back?
frisbee. Do you do knees? Thanks so much. I appreciate you for sharing these insights and perspectives, and thanks everyone for watching and listening. If you want to find more great healthcare IT content like this, be sure to check it out at healthcareittoday.com or search for the CIO podcast by Healthcare IT Today on your favorite podcasting application. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.